Mr. Stern, paging Mr. Stern, Henry Stern.
Answering your call. At your
Welcome.
service. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you, first of all, Mr. Chair, and your staff for all the hard work you put in the bill. This is an important measure we're facing here today. Not often in California do we have the ability to impact the entire world with one stroke of a pen, but I think this bill could actually be what turns the tide in the fight to preserve the last remaining iconic endangered African species. SB1487 does that by prohibiting the possession of body parts of 11 iconic African endangered species. And earlier this year, as you know, we lost Sudan, the last male northern white rhino, and these trends just keep continuing. Elephants are down 30% in population over the last, since 2007. Lions are down 43% from 1993 to 2014, and then the black rhino has declined 97% since 1970. I think the essence of this bill is that conservation strategy need not adopt a policy of poaching and of killing to actually achieve its ends. That we don't need to kill to conserve, and that in fact, that whatever prowess some tough guy may feel by putting, mounting on above his mantle an African elephant or a black rhino, that celebration of masculinity is dead. It's outdated and it has to end. And this era of trophy hunting has to end. And I think it starts with us. So I have folks who know much more about this than I here with me today. So with that, I would just respectfully ask for your aye vote. And I'll allow, who wants to go first?
I will.
If you don't mind. Okay. So Nick Sackett's with Social Compassion and Legislation.
Chair, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Nicholas Sackett, Director of Legislative Affairs for Social Compassion and Legislation. We are honored to be the sponsor of this important legislation. This bill is an important step in reducing the unnecessary and unsustainable killing of elephants, lions, rhinos, and other species that are under threat due to habitat loss, poaching, as well as lawful killing by international trophy hunters. We can't stop the decline to extinction of these animals without addressing each aspect. The United States is the largest importer of wildlife trophies in the world, with hundreds of elephants and thousands of lions killed and imported over the past decade. Sadly, many of these animals are killed by California residents and brought into the state. While hunters regularly cite the sustainable nature of their take and the so-called conservation benefits that flow from such killing, no studies have proven this to be the case. Throughout Africa, the purported economic benefits of trophy hunting go to wealthy hunting outfitters and corrupt officials. For example, there's evidence to suggest that less than 3% of trophy hunting revenues actually are shared with the local communities that are responsible for protecting these animals. Meanwhile, the economic benefits from ecotourism dwarf other forms of revenue for these countries while not decimating endangered species. Trophy hunting results not just in the needless death of individual animals, but it creates a scenario where good genes are being taken out of the gene pool and these animals' genetic pool are declining. I want to give you an example. Lion populations have declined almost 50% in the last 2 decades because of trophy hunting. In this same period, over 20,000 African lion parts were traded, representing over 7,000 individual lions. And shamefully, the U.S. imported over half of these, primarily in the form of trophies. So despite the shocking population decline, in 2017, the Trump administration reversed the moratorium on importing these important endangered species, making way for an even more rapid decline. We are faced with some preemption roadblocks, and that is why SB 1487 is narrowly tailored to thread the needle and be able to do what California is able to do, which is ban the possession in the state. With that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote and I introduce Sam Jahola.
Hi, my name is Sam Hohola. I'm a retired deputy resident agent in charge for the second largest port in the country here in Los Angeles. Former U.S. Fish and Wildlife agent with 23 years covert experience. In 2011, the world's population reached 7 billion and is now 7.6 billion. Many stressed ecosystems leave larger mammals vulnerable, like elephants, giraffes, and both African rhino species. Serious trophy hunters seek a quarry like black-maned lions and rare African elephant tuskers. Genetic viability can be impacted, coupled with demand for body parts in traditional medicine. Widespread corruption plagues Zimbabwe and South Africa, with little or no jail time for most offenders. My 2003 investigation on allegations of illegal lion hunting in Zimbabwe revealed their poorly written laws prevented federal prosecution of suspect U.S. trophy hunters, including a similar instance like Cecil the lion. Lesson in extinction. In the early 1800s, passenger pigeon numbers were several billion, and by 1900, none survived in the wild. History does repeat itself with extinction. Larger species are vulnerable. Lions, elephants, rhinos, leopards, and hippopotamus are exploited in the global online black market trade of illegal wildlife. Large social media companies profit from the illicit wildlife trade of rhino horn, elephant ivory, including lion and tiger claws. Stephen Kahn, renowned whistleblower attorney, documented extensive illicit trade through sting operations detailed in this month's Wired magazine. These social media companies are reportedly at the center of the global trade in endangered species. Trafficking in illegal wildlife parts is akin to taking a stolen vehicle and selling the parts individually that are worth more than the whole. Growth of the illegal wildlife trade. The illegal wildlife trade was estimated at $10 billion annually in 2011 to $23 billion in 2014, and more recently $115 billion after a recent month-long investigation in 92 countries. Overnight parcel shipping venues have been a platform for decades that support trafficking a host of illegal wildlife parts and products, including live reptiles shipped overnight from around the globe. Wildlife crime supports transnational criminal syndicates and terrorism. In 2015, my colleague, Brian Christie, in National Geographic's Warlords of Ivory, chronicled the elephant ivory trade to transnational criminal syndicates and suggested evidence of ivory trafficking used to forge links between several African terrorist groups. Other independent reports support his assessment. Think globally, act locally. With Jane Goodall's support of SB1487 and the supporting evidence of 21st century impacts on the illegal wildlife trade, California legislators have an opportunity to make a difference with this key legislation in a productive, unified effort. Thank you kindly for all the opportunity to speak in support of this critical legislation.
Great, thank you. So those who are in support, please just state your name, if you belong to an organization that you're representing, and your position, which is support at this time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Judy Mancuso. My group is Social Compassion and Legislation. We are the sponsor of the bill, and I'm from Laguna Beach, California, and this is a nonpartisan issue. It's about saving animals, not about hunting. Thank you.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in support.
Patty Shanker from Los Angeles for Animal Defenders International. What is happening is a global tragedy. Let's do something. This bill does. Thank you.
Teresa Berkovich on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council in support.
Gloria Butler on behalf of Social Compassion and Legislation and the Humane Society National Council. I support.
Simone Reyes, Los Angeles, California, do what's right for animals in support.
Katie Cleary, president of World Animal News and Peace for Animals out of Los Angeles. I'm here speaking on behalf of Jane Goodall, and we all support, including Jane and her team.
Good afternoon. My name is Amti Sayana. I'm a criminal defense attorney and an animal rights activist with social compassion legislation. I ask that you support this bill. Animals belong in the wild and not on the wall. Thank you.
Deborah Clausen, Nevada, California, Humane Society of the United States. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Good morning, Kristen Monsell with the Center for Biological Diversity, and on behalf of our over 100,000 members and supporters here in California, we strongly support this bill. Thank you.
Elizabeth Baker from San Diego, in support. Thank you.
Kristen Barr von Stratton from Los Angeles, I support.
Christy Malley from Roseville, California, please support. Leah Sturgis from Los Angeles, and strong support.
Leslie Davies from San Diego, California. Please support.
Betsy Denhart from San Diego, California, and representing Pet Assistance Foundation. Please support.
Piper Kressel, HSUS, Rockland, California. Support.
Janet McCarthy, HSUS. I live in Folsom. Please support. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer Kennedy with HSUS from El Dorado County. Please support. Keep California on the top for the animals.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Brooks. I'm from Newport Beach, California, and I ask that you support so we can keep these animals out of the history books for generations to come.
Hello there, my name is Erin Hauge, Humane Society of the United States District Leader from Sacramento, and in full support of this bill. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shelley Elam. I'm with Social Compassion and Legislation. I'm in strong support of this bill.
Mary Kate Stewart from Laguna Beach, California, and animals belong in the wild and not on a mantle.
Hillary Pickles from Los Angeles, California, supporter of social compassion and legislation. Support.
Bethany Davis, California, credentialed teacher. Let's have these animals for our children.
Betsy Wasson from Washington, D.C. Please support.
Cassandra Shostrom from Los Angeles. Thank you for making a change.
Crystal Moreland, on behalf of the entire membership in California on the Humane Society of the United States, we strongly support this measure.
Linda Middlesworth, Sacramento Animal Safe, Sacramento Animal Rights, Sacramento Vegan Society. We all want compassion for animals.
Galen Hazelhofer, Sacramento, California. I'm a volunteer at the Bradshaw Shelter. Strongly support.
Jane Velez Mitchell, attorney and author, Marina Del Rey. We have destroyed well over 50% of all wildlife vertebrates. We won't have any left soon. We've got to do something. Thank you.
Genesis Butler. We did not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. I am representing the children, and I urge you to vote yes.
People, yes for the animals.
Janelle Palacio, mother of these compassionate children. They taught me compassion by not hurting animals, so I urge you to vote yes, and they brought me here.
Ms. Palacio, you should be very proud. They're great. I see no other testimony in support of the bill. Is there any opposition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Jackson. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm a professional conservationist for over 35 years with actual active programs in the relevant countries. Most of the wildlife that you've covered by this bill are secured by hunting, or they are stable or increasing in southern and eastern Africa. Now, the difference between the southern and eastern Africa is the hunting programs. Sustainable use of pay type of system that was adopted from the United States because the wildlife managers there, with their PhDs, were obtained in the United States, where we have the North American wildlife model based upon the use of pay system. Now, in particular, let me say that hunting provides three things that are critical that specifically address the threats to wildlife in southern Eastern Africa, where most of it still exists. Habitat loss is the first threat. The second is poaching, especially particularly valuable items like ivory, rhino horn, and so forth. The third is you have to have a conservation infrastructure. Just like in the state of California, who in the world pays for that? So what you have here is more habitat, hunting habitat, than you can imagine are these good faith people. In some countries like Tanzania, the hunting areas are 6 times larger. 6 times larger than the national parks, the Serengeti and Ngorongoro Crater and so forth. To the opposite end, in Zimbabwe or Mozambique, the hunting areas are twice the size of the national parks. The wildlife that we're talking about here owes its existence to that habitat. And that habitat exists because of the hunting programs, the use-of-pay programs. It's the most in the world, and it's undisputed. Second, poaching. anti-poaching, or what we prefer to call counter-poaching. That's what controls the poaching. Same thing in California. Law enforcement is paid for by the hunters and fishermen here, by the non-resident tourist safari hunters and licensed regulated hunting in Africa. Most of the habitat is protected by the hunting community, directly or indirectly. 4 principal ways. They pay the bills, the wildlife departments. 80% of the money they get from the fees goes to anti-poaching. These are the facts. Hunting operators themselves have to police their land. This is a fact of life. You have to police your resource, like Ducks Unlimited creates wildlife habitat. Third, the communities have their own, and by law in most cases that I'm talking about, are required by law, if they're to participate.
All right, so you got to wrap this up.
In all fairness. Now.
Yeah, everyone gets about 2 minutes. If this wasn't mentioned earlier in the committee hearing, everyone gets about 2 minutes.
May I summarize?
That's what I'm asking you to do.
I'm sorry?
That's what I'm asking you to do.
Oh, okay. In brief, you don't want these hunting memorabilia to be left in Africa to find the wrong place, okay? I've sent the committee members 3 letters this morning from Africa, government, wildlife departments, permanent secretaries, saying this is the last thing you want to do. Congressman John Dingell introduced into the Endangered Species Act the enhancement provisions. Permits are only granted for these species if enhancement is proven.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kathy Lynch, representing Safari Club International, Outdoor Sportsmen's Coalition, California Sportsmen's Lobby, and the National Shooting Sports Foundation. I'll respect your 2 minutes and be brief. I just want to cover some really basic things about the bill. First of all, this bill was one of the gut amends after the spot belt deadline on April 2nd, for the record. And this bill is not germane. This was a Public Utilities Code bill, which dealt in transportation and now is amended to be the Fish and Game Code. The bill attempts to discourage Californians from legal game hunting in Africa. I know the supporters mentioned they had some barriers. Well, a few of those barriers are this bill is contrary to the Federal Endangered Species Act for many species, thus invalidating it and preempted, frankly. The state of New Jersey enacted such a law to have it tossed out in the courts after New Jersey realized it was unconstitutional, and it entered a consent decree. California would be contrary to federal law, exposing California to expensive litigation, and it would likely lose. The bill ignores the conservation benefits of hunting and management practices, as was mentioned earlier, and we're not in a better position to judge the science in the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, CITES, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. The bill would actually hurt African communities in sound management practices. It attempts to manage resources in another continent in a hearing without the benefit of the experts, and that is very dangerous, frankly. For example, the reference to Botswana stopping hunting in 2014 as the success is misleading at best. This was done on state and communal lands. Hunting was still allowed on private lands. Additionally, since that time, research suggests that poaching and human-wildlife conflicts have increased and not decreased since the suspension, and the rural communities are petitioning their government to reopen hunting. The laws referenced that address wildlife outside California are for commercial purposes and personal possession, which is, this bill goes way beyond that. For non-ESA species, there is no science to support the banning of importation and possession, and for the listed species, the United Fish and Wildlife Services has jurisdiction over those determinations based on science. The penalties are staggering and establish a bounty hunting on law-abiding citizens, a taking, and will drain our law enforcement officials from the duty of managing our own resource. And I would just implore you in close to think about a couple things. You're sitting in judgment of a legal recreational pursuit of your citizenry out of this state, and you're telling them that they can legally bring it in, they can legally possess it, but we're going to come get you on day 30 and make you a criminal. And I would close to Senator Stern, who last time I testified called hunters poachers, and this time suggests that women don't hunt. They do.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony. Is there any other testimony in opposition to the bill? Please just state your name, your organization, and your position, which right now is...
Hi, I'm Dan Sozzi. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the California Waterfowl Association and also our Legislative Committee Chair. We're firmly opposed to the bill. It won't do what it purports to do.
All right, thank you. The opposition had 2 minutes apiece to
thank
state the reasons why. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Bill Gaines, Gaines and Associates, on behalf of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, the California chapter of the Wild Sheep Foundation, California Deer Association, and 6 other wildlife organizations in opposition to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Roy Griffith speak on behalf of the California Rifle and Pistol Association. We're opposed to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Waters, member of the Board of Directors of the Missouri Wildlife, or the Missouri Safari Club, and that's Missouri spelled M-Z-U-R-I, which is a Swahili word. Urge you to oppose this bill. Vote on it because of science and the facts, not emotion. Thank you.
Dan Reed with National Rifle Association in opposition. Thanks.
Sam Paredes representing Gun Owners California. Over 30,000 men and women in California who are opposed to this bill.
My name is Wyatt Jutton. I also oppose this bill.
Robert Dietz, U.S. Representative for the Rifa Conservation Camp and visitor to Africa 5 times. It's removed snares many times. I'm opposed to this bill.
Thank you. Seeing no other opposition, we'll take it back to the members if you have any questions or comments for on the bill. Yes, Member Friedman.
Thank you. I am going to be supporting the bill today. I do have one question / concern. As somebody who also works as an antique dealer, I am concerned about what this means for people who have these items that are older. I've seen what's happened with the ivory ban, which I also support, but quite honestly, when it comes to vintage jewelry dealers, just an average person who's trying to maybe sell a piece of jewelry that could be from the 1800s, it's really been a bad situation on the ground for a lot of people, with a lot of items being seized from people. We don't even know what type of bone or ivory is in this. And I have the same concern with this bill. Do you have any way of addressing that, or are you saying that no matter when these items were procured, or and they're all fair game? What's your position on that?
Thank you, actually, for that question. It's something we've been working on with both committee staff here as well as Assembly Judiciary. I think this bill is double referred. So the amendments that we've been contemplating, maybe Nick can comment on them, but there's a process for demonstrating the date of possession to sort of distinguish between items that are already here and items that are brought in should this bill become law after the ban. Nick,
So just to be clear,
Yeah.
so you can still sell an item if it's an older item, or no?
This bill doesn't deal with selling at all. So if the selling of the item is legal under federal law, then you'll still be able to sell it. Now, again, now federal law doesn't preempt possession, so we're saying you can't possess it. Now, if that means that you can't sell it, then you won't be able to sell it. But there's a grandfather date. So if you've had the item already, and federal law says you can sell it, then you can sell it.
But can you purchase then an item that somebody else had possessed previously before the ban?
No, you will not be able to buy
So
it.
they can't be sold. Well, to me, that's an issue. I mean, some of these items are quite old. They would fall under the category of antiques, and I think that you should try to add an amendment that allows for the sale of those items. And I understand that there's some difficulty, but do you really want to criminalize people if they have grandma's shawl that was a leopard shawl?
No,
Maybe you do, but
we don't want to criminalize that possession if you've already had it prior to this bill's enactment. So the amendment says you can demonstrate possession of the article before January 1st, 2019 by furnishing some documentation. So valid permits, bill of lading, valid appraisal, photographic. But to your point about sales, it's out of our purview to get into sales. The reason the bill focuses on possession is strictly to stay within our lane and not be preempted by federal law. So that's
right.
sort of why.
But then you can't purchase one of these older items because you would not have owned it before, no matter when it was procured. You would not have owned it.
Right.
So you're basically de facto banning the sale of any antique items. So just something for you to think about moving forward.
Will do.
Because then, even if somebody goes to an antique store or a flea market and buys something that's clearly old, maybe it's a piece of something that's in an old piece of jewelry, for instance, which we see commonly in this business. You're then saying that that item, that they're breaking the law to possess it at that point.
I will point out that under CITES Appendix 1, all those species listed are not allowed to be sold under the ESA and CITES. So, you can't have commercial sales of endangered species on Appendix 1.
Thank you, and thanks for that clarification. Assemblymember Mathis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a few questions, and kind of for both sides. What are the conservation benefits of regulating hunting under your bill, Senator? And if I can get answers, because it seems like you're trying to discourage that. Also, how does the bill obstruct the conservation activities under Federal Endangered Species Act? How important is the conservation of hunting to these rural communities and programs? And I know some of that was addressed earlier. If you could fully answer that. What effect will the bill have on the capacity of these range states to protect these species? And then,
Can we go one by one?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got great questions for you.
It's okay. Let's start at the top.
Senator, you know I've traveled internationally and I've seen some of these things. So
yeah. So give me the first one again.
Yeah. What are the conservation benefits of the regulated hunting under your bill, and what do they aim to discourage?
So the goal of the bill is enhanced conservation, and the thesis of the bill is that hunting is a much less sustainable way to promote conservation of these African endangered species than through other techniques. So we think more dollars get back into the community to do the kind of poaching enforcement and the other sort of important measures that the opponents were discussing through safaris, ecotourism without an actual hunting objective, but that there are different ways to go to that continent and enjoy these animals that actually will bring more revenue back to those communities and keep fewer and fewer poachers out there.
But if that was the case, Senator, don't you think the countries would be pushing for that?
Well, the countries are just hungry for money any way they can get it. So
I'd like to hear.
That's like saying, without wings, a bird will fly. All right. The wings in this case are the revenue from the hunting, the habitat for the hunting, the community programs involving millions of people, and major NGOs, not the ones that sponsors, but major NGOs, the WWF, the largest...
The worldwide.
Worldwide Foundation for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, all the range nations, the specialist groups, all the action plans are all dependent on hunting, just like our wildlife in North America. I mean, it's a fact. And we're not talking about a little bit of the habitat. We're not talking about a large part of it. We're talking about most of the habitat, most of the anti-poaching revenue. These are facts. They're not disputed facts. I've sent by fax a copy of these, all these facts to every committee member, about 30 pages, well-referenced authoritative pages. And I'm on the IUCN, I'm on the SULI, Sustainable Use Livelihood Specialist Group. I'm on the African Lion Working Group. I've been doing this for 35 years. And I promise you that there are tens of thousands of law enforcement officers paid by the hunters in Africa. There's no substitute for it. There's no alternative, and this bill certainly doesn't provide it. You're trying to say the bird's going to fly without wings. That's the answer to the first question.
Okay. We just want the birds to be able to fly, not be off this planet.
Okay, I just want to, let's just have a little bit of decorum. So, sir, I know you've got someone who's asking you questions behind you, but direct your answers to the chair, and that is how you direct your answers to the committee. And we also want to stop a back and forth conversation. I know you guys are enjoying that conversation. I think I'd enjoy that conversation, but that's not the place right here to have a conversation. So if Mr. Mathis has some follow-up questions, make your questions. If someone has a pertinent answer, go ahead and answer it. But let's try to limit some sidebar or some quips so that we can just make sure that we can get and vote on this very important bill.
Very good.
My apologies for putting my back.
Yes. In the earlier comments, and please direct your remarks into the microphone so they're recorded. How does the bill obstruct the conservation activities under the Endangered Species Act? And sir, if you could direct into the microphone.
Yes.
That was to the opponent.
All right. The Endangered Species Act has special provisions to use hunting as a tool for conservation. And today, with listed species, it's the foremost tool. It also implements CITES. So CITES has special resolutions allowing quotas for these species, for example, black rhino 5, and they have to meet certain standards, and the money spends $400,000 a rhino, goes straight to the conservation of the species, and on and on and on and on. It was designed that way from inception. John Dingell was the author of the Endangered Species Act, all three of them, in the 60s and in 1973, and it specifically provides for the Secretary can issue permits for importation of hunting trophies when it enhances survival of the species. So an elaborate program that uses leverage for the southern and eastern African countries, that they can import their trophies only if they meet certain standards. It's a real burden. It takes sometimes years, 10, 20 years to import, but it steps those programs up in Africa. They're the foremost programs in the world, and it's the reason why the populations are stable, secure, and are growing in southern and eastern Africa. The only ones, most of the lions, most of the elephants, most of the rhino, if not all of them almost. And the distinction about that is their sustainable use-based program. That's how it affects or is in conflict with the Endangered Species Act.
Okay, and then follow up on that. So how important is the conservation hunting to the rural communities within the programs? I know WWF's Campfire, Life Plus Project, you're talking close to, something like 1 million families in some of these cases in these countries. So if you can expand on that, sir.
Forgive my back again. I'll talk to the chairman. This is particularly important. These are rural people. They ultimately will determine the survival of the species. They also, in the short term, determine whether or not these species have a place to live outside of protected areas, which are not as numerous as their homelands. Most wildlife in southern and eastern Africa exist in the community areas. Now, there are elaborate programs supported by the Fish and Wildlife Service, by U.S. Congress, by CITES, by World Wildlife Fund, and others that, for example, the Campfire program in Zimbabwe has 777,000 families, mostly children, that earn 70% of their revenue from tourist safari hunting. Most of these species that we're speaking of here today. In fact, those species are so important, the system would collapse without the import of those trophies in the United States. But also, the species would disappear because the surveys have shown they have no tolerance for lions and elephants in their backyard. That these provisions actually benefit the species and are growing those populations. The same thing is in Namibia. Namibia has World Wildlife Fund has a Life Plus program, 30 years old. It's one of the most renowned programs in the world. And it depends on the hunting of these species that's generating the core revenue. This is true in Tanzania. It's true in all of southern and eastern Africa. The most successful programs today are dependent on hunting revenue. This is just as black and white, open, uncontested. Well, you're not hearing about the facts. You're hearing about these are the facts. And IUCN stands behind it. WWF stands behind it. The U.S. government, Fish and Wildlife Service stands behind it. And enforcement of the Endangered Species Act and CITES, 187 nations stand behind it. I will, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
there's so much to say about this.
All right, so a point has been made. Senator Stern would like to respond on that point, and I will ask you to do that. So please do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Be complete.
I would contest the alleged facts by simply stating that of the $40 billion, and this is in your committee analysis, but of the direct economic contribution into Africa in terms of supporting jobs in these rural communities, to somehow say that they have to choose hunting to survive is not accurate. Tourism alone has contributed over $40 billion in 2016 and supported over 6 million jobs in Africa. And very often the hunting and ecotourism are directly in conflict with each other. Not always, not necessarily always, but the way that these programs are administered, we simply don't have the confidence in the current arrangement that somehow this federal government is, A, going to make those certifications fairly, because you have folks who are avid hunters of endangered species in the White House. So I don't have a lot of trust in them to be able to enforce whatever goals Mr. Dingle may have had way back. But more so, and Nick can probably fill you in, but there is more money coming in on the ecotourism side than on the hunting side to support these species.
Senator, do you actually have numbers from those countries stating that?
Yeah, so...
Because tourism is tourism, regardless of whether they're going for equal or for
so
hunting.
Let's fill you in with a couple
Yeah,
stats.
according to...
Or archaeology in some of these
Sure.
cases.
According to Humane Society International, trophy hunting revenue percentage of total tourism dollars is less than 1%.
That's according to the Humane Society.
Of International Humane Society, yeah.
Okay, that's not according to the government of these countries.
Well, the problem with getting information from these countries is that you can't, and I'll give you an example.
I'm not interested in biased data. I'm interested in the country's data. And if you don't have that, then you don't have that, sir.
Right. We don't have that because they don't give it to us, because it doesn't exist. They can't actually have those numbers if they don't have a robust management system, which they don't.
All right, so do we have any other members who would like to ask a question?
I'd like to finish my line of questioning. Thank you.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's, you guys want to actually have solid numbers. You know, the programs that we use here with our hunting tags and the way our system is, the systems that these other countries have are much better put together, quite frankly, than even some of the ones that we have here. And those revenues go directly towards that and towards benefiting those communities. It goes into their schools. It goes in their infrastructure to help protect these animals. And for all the reasons of all you ladies with your phones shaking your heads no at me, I encourage you to get the facts, because if you truly want to protect these environments, you need to be able to fund it.
Yeah, Mr. Mathis, would you direct your comments to the committee, not to the crowd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Garcia. I have great concern over this because these countries, here we are in California, and we're going to dictate a possible funding formula for another country to survive, and we have no business doing that. If they wanted our help, they'd reach out to us and get help. And they've got worldwide organizations going on that are contributing, that are funding this, and there's so many documentaries on this and on the benefits of these programs, and to outlaw it and to go even with Assemblywoman Friedman's comments. I mean, some of the pieces of the bill get into the sale, the ownership, and these pieces aren't even fully put together. So I mean, I've got a lot of concerns with your bill. I know you work hard on your legislation, Senator. Would love to talk to you more on it afterwards, but I cannot support it today. Thank you.
Understood.
Senator Stern, did you want to reply, or can we have some other members? Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Thank you very much, Senator. I have a question from Mr. Harper and then Mr. Kalra. Thank you. Mr. Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Briefly, one of the points that I heard really hit home with me, and that's the issue about federal preemption, that the federal law avoids any state law that may effectively prohibit what is authorized pursuant to the exemption or permit provided for in the chapter of the Endangered Species Act. You know, California has a tough track record when it comes to trying to pass laws that don't fit within federal law. Just today, the U.S. Supreme Court decided against California, NIFLA versus Becerra, for AB 775 in 2015 regarding the FACT Act. And so, though I understand that this bill tries to circumvent that issue with this 30-day get it out of the state provision, I find that this bill is substantially similar to the New Jersey law that was cited, that was in fact thrown out by the courts. And so for that reason, I think that I'll be voting in opposition to this bill.
Thanks, Mr. Harper. Mr. Kalra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Levine. And thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill forward. You know, 3 months ago, the last male northern white rhino died. And then just looking at even what's in the staff analysis, which I think the staff, and I want to commend the staff for doing a good job on the analysis. United Nations World Tourism Organization, of the 56 million trips to Africa in 2013, wildlife watching represented 80% of their total annual sales. In 2016, Sub-Saharan Africa, over $40 billion, supported over 6.1 million jobs. Those are facts. Saying that there are so many documentaries is not fact. The reality is that we understand what happens when we put in real, thoughtful conservation programs. You see it right there in Botswana, now having 1/3 of the elephants after they really went after poachers and they banned hunting. They made hunting illegal. So, yes, and I don't disagree with the numbers that have been stated because that's the current state of affairs, because there isn't other alternatives. And there isn't a market demand to create those other alternatives. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. We do have influence over what other nations do. And we have to live by our values, not by others' values. And if currently some of the nations have action plans dependent on hunting, we can help transform those economies, just like in some other African economies, to ecotourism by slowing the amount of revenue they get from that aspect of the industry and growing the amount of revenue they get from ecotourism and more environmentally friendly and animal friendly policies. So we dictate as a planet, and certainly California as the 5th largest economy plays a huge role in that, whether it's through our climate change policy, whether it's through consumer protection, you name it. This is another example where we have the opportunity to say, this isn't acceptable for us as Californians, and we can thereby help to promote the healthier aspects of the tourism industry in those nations that actually create far more jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Kara. Mr. Chu.
And thank you very much. I'll be supporting this bill, but I want to also get some commitment about the point that brought up by Assemblymember Freeman. You know, what happens if I have something that was passed on by my grandmother? What do I need to do? I think, you know, between now and we hit the assembly floor, I hope to get a very, very clear direction. You know, if you ask me to go to somebody to verify the date that was procured, it will be a lot of problem for those people. They just got something from their, you know, grandma.
If I may, just briefly, the goal of this measure is not to go after hand-me-downs or items that are within families' possession. It's about the big dollar trade. We don't want to go after grandmothers here unless those grandmothers are part of a large-scale endangered species trade. So, but I appreciate the point. I'm not trying to be flip with you, Assembly Member. I will look at the provisions that we sort of put in here to bulk up that determination, and we don't want that pall cast over every family to have to go then back and look through knickknacks in their drawers, or, you know, in Senator Friedman's case, you know, through an antique shop. But this is about the market in these parts at a much larger scale. So, but I do appreciate the sensitivity. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate you're not going to go after grandmothers. You know, that's a good thing. But you know, I think one thing, and it's something that I try to emphasize even with hunting here domestically, right? Is and I think this point has been made, but I think it deserves emphasis. Is that the hunters are actually some of the biggest conservationists. They're the source of the revenue for a lot of the conservation efforts. I mean, I think it was mentioned Ducks Unlimited. So in my district, as you know, we have one of the migratory waterfowl population that comes through on the Pacific Flyway. We have created huge amounts of habitat in that area, and a lot of it is done by hunters. It's also done by farmers and ranchers. So, you know, I have some of my own legislation that's trying to encourage that practice, more cover crops, things that support that. But And it seems to me from looking at this issue, you know, obviously there's a lot of emotion surrounding the issue. I totally understand that. But these, you know, hunters that are going back are actually generating a lot of revenue to help support conservation. I think it was pointed out. Now, there are disparities in different parts of Africa where where there hasn't been that, and we need to have stronger anti-poaching efforts to stop this, in its tracks. But to kind of put this kind of just a blanket prohibition going forward seems to me like that doesn't necessarily get at the issue of the poaching, and it may have the unintended impact of cutting down on the revenue that helps support conservation programs back in Africa and helping to support these species that I think everybody on this committee agrees we don't want to see them in the history books. We want the species preserved. But part of good conservation practice is hunting too, because there are cases where there is overpopulation. And if you don't like to see animals starving because of the overpopulation, then you should support responsible hunting and conservation efforts. And so what I don't want to see happen is an unintended consequence that's going to hurt the very thing that we're trying to protect. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And so maybe if you could just kind of respond, to that part of
Sure.
it.
Happy to. We want those conservation efforts to continue, and actually, they're not working, right? Like they're making a go at it, and there are some wins out there, but on the whole, the continent is in decline. I mean, these are endangered species on these watch lists with CITES and the IUCN for a reason, right? They may not survive this generation. So something has got to change. How we're approaching this problem isn't working. And this bill, obviously, this is not about ducks or California habitat. In this really unique, I appreciate the example, though. It's a very unique circumstance. You're talking about a very limited list of iconic species that are clearly endangered, are clearly in decline. The facts are not in dispute on that. On the whole, in that continent, these species are collapsing. And again, the thesis, and we can agree to disagree on what the best way to tackle the problem is. Our premise is that ecotourism and these alternative forms of tourism are much more effective about getting dollars back locally than the hunting industry. And I'm not saying all hunting is poaching, by the way. That's not the I should state that for the record, and and women are hunters too. I also will acknowledge that, but I don't care whether you're a woman or a man. If you're hunting an endangered species, it's a problem for at least for me as a Californian. So that's why I brought this forward. But I think it's something we could look at in terms of monitoring or some way to sort of actually improve our data sets. I think we've got about as good as we can get out of the current state of government data coming from Africa right now. It's as you know, these are very challenging governments to interact with, and you may disagree with this, but I don't have a lot of trust in our federal government right now to then broker those deals and really push the conservation agenda, which is why I think California ought to step in. So anyway, I do appreciate where you're coming from on it, and this is our effort to sort of reorient the commerce globally to say there's a better way to save these species.
If I could just, if opposition maybe could
Please.
respond to that as well.
At the chair's discretion.
Oh, yes, sir. First thing, I mentioned birds without wings don't fly. We're talking about ecotourism. Eliminating hunting is really eliminating the wings, because that's what makes the conservation system fly. That's my analogy. But let me make it clear that the lodges in Tanzania and elsewhere are half empty. Okay, and there are not enough ecotourism to cover this, and the ecotourists don't pay the fees to the government. Right. They like the hunting does. It's that the whole conservation paradigm in southern Eastern Africa is based upon safari hunting, tourist safari hunting. It works. It's the only populations that are stable or increasing, and they definitely are secure. So we're talking about don't cut the wings off the bird.
Okay, we heard you say that.
All right. No one cares
Can you
more.
come to a conclusion?
No one cares more about these animals than the hunters. They need us as much as we need them. We can't hunt. We can't shoot ducks. We can't have 13 million acres of wetland habitat without ducks unlimited.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Yes, Ms. Carrillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the author for bringing this very important piece of legislation forward. I know the conversation is not easy. It's very challenging. But again, this is not about the inability to hunt ducks or geese or deer. This is about endangered species. And I'm sad to say that you may have to take an amendment because the white rhinoceros no longer exists. And it's included in the bill. And I think that's a travesty to our planet. And just really grateful that you brought this forward, and I'm very happy to support.
Thanks, Ms. Carrillo. Be glad to entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask
I heard a motion from Ms. Rubio and seconded by Ms. Carrillo and Mr. Gloria and a lot of others.
Mr. Chairman, could you indulge me for 10 seconds?
No, we took.
There's an extremely germane point.
All right, so we'll keep this here at the dais. If there are any other questions or comments, seeing none up here, I just have a few comments that I would like to make. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of commentary about economic impacts and about the conservation funds. I do want to draw people to the excellent analysis written by committee staff that does document some of these issues. So we have about a $40 billion impact to sub-Saharan Africa annually. This was based in 2016 by the World Travel and Tourism Council, and we have data on the hunting impact, which is about $200 million a year of revenue. I just want to make sure that those numbers were pretty clear. I myself have been to sub-Saharan Africa twice. Been to Masai Mara, I've been to the Serengeti, beautiful places. I didn't bring home any trophies, thank goodness. I think there must be a soulless sense of entitlement that would drive anyone to want to kill and murder an endangered species. And so I'm grateful for the service that you're providing us, Senator, to be able to weigh in on this and to protect these species. I also want to talk about the conservation funds. A National Geographic story, documentaries were mentioned. A story report was written about how it was notoriously hard to pin down. I'm really just lifting this straight from the analysis. It's so good. Whether conservation funds were properly used. And the conclusion was that it is impossible in kleptocracies to track whether conservation funds actually conserved these threatened animals, and that trophy hunting may actually make matters worse. So Chairman Garcia's recommendation is an aye. I'm going to follow his excellent leadership and vote aye. Please call the roll.
The motion is to pass to the Committee on Judiciary. Eduardo Garcia. Aye. Garcia, aye. Gallagher? No. Gallagher, no. Bigelow? No. Bigelow, no. Carrillo? Aye. Carrillo, aye. Choi? Chu? Aye. Chu, aye. Friedman? Gloria? Aye. Gloria, aye. Harper? No. Harper, no. Calra? Aye. Calra, aye. Levine?
Aye.
Levine, aye. Mathis?
No.
Mathis, no. Rubio? Aye. Rubio, aye. Salas? Wood? Wood, aye. 6, 8. 8 to 4.
Oh. The bill is out, 8-4. And members, we have a bill that we need to expedite over to environmental. We're going to recess for 1 minute.